Hey guys, tonight we drift quietly into the cool marble corridors of Olympus, where the air feels heavy with incense, polished stone, and unspoken tension. You're standing beside towering columns veined with gold, watching clouds slide lazily past balconies that overlook the mortal world. Somewhere nearby, thunder murmurs, low, distant, familiar, and you already sense that living here means never fully relaxing. This is divine marriage, after all. And honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this relationship dynamic for more than a week. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, go ahead and drop a comment telling everyone where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk slowly, barefoot on cool stone, toward the central throne room. To your left is Zeus's seat, massive, loud even when empty, practically vibrating with authority. To the right is Hera's throne, just as grand, just as elevated, but quieter, more controlled, and somehow heavier. This is where you begin to understand that Hera is not merely Zeus's wife. She is the institution of marriage itself, sitting upright, composed, and eternally alert. The mainstream historical fact you should keep in mind as you stand here is this. In ancient Greek religion, Hera was worshipped primarily as the goddess of marriage, lawful union, and legitimate lineage. Not love, not passion, marriage, contracts, vows, structure. She predates Zeus in many cult traditions, and some historians still argue whether Hera began as a powerful independent deity, later absorbed into Zeus's patriarchal hierarchy. You watch her now as she adjusts the folds of her robe with meticulous care. Everything about her posture says order, control, expectation. She doesn't fidget, she doesn't sigh. She simply exists in a constant state of dignified readiness, as if the next humiliation could arrive at any moment. And statistically speaking, it probably will. This is the everyday life of Hera. Vigilance disguised as grace. A quirky, fringed tidbit whispers through the myths as you observe her more closely. Some lesser-known traditions claim Hera bathes daily in the spring of Knossos to renew her virginity, not in the physical sense, but symbolically, restoring herself after the endless erosions of betrayal. You imagine her slipping away at dawn, not to escape Zeus, but to reclaim herself before the day begins. It's less about purity and more about survival. You feel it now, the tension between role and self. Hera's marriage is not optional. It is cosmic infrastructure. If she leaves Zeus, marriage itself fractures. Lineage collapses. Legitimacy dissolves. Olympus becomes chaos, with better outfits. Historians still argue whether Hera's jealous rage reflects misogynistic storytelling or a coded expression of women's power constrained by ancient social structures. Standing here, watching her reign beside a husband who cannot stop straying, you sense that the truth is deeply uncomfortable and probably both. Zeus enters the chamber with the confidence of someone who has never faced consequences he couldn't thunder his way out of. He smiles. The room adjusts itself to his presence. Hera doesn't move. She doesn't need to. Her stillness is its own counterforce. You notice that she never confronts him immediately. She waits. Hera is not impulsive jealousy. She is slow, accumulating consequence. This is where modern audiences often get her wrong. Hera isn't angry all the time. She's patient, calculating, enduring. Her anger is archival. As the day unfolds, you trail her through Olympus, learning that divine marriage is not about affection but optics. Hera oversees rituals, receives petitions from minor deities, and ensures that unions, mortal and immortal, follow proper form. Her domain is ceremony and expectation. She corrects posture, adjusts seating, ensures names are spoken correctly. These details matter because legitimacy lives in details. A nymph bows too casually. Hera raises an eyebrow. Lesson learned. You begin to understand something quietly devastating. Hera's jealousy isn't a flaw. It's a symptom. The endless cycle begins here. Not with rage, but with duty. With showing up. With staying seated beside the thunderer no matter how many times the ground shakes. Somewhere in the distance, laughter echoes, probably Zeus again, charming someone new. Hera's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. You catch it because you're watching closely now. This is how it always starts. Not with fury, with restraint. And as you follow her back toward the throne, the marble cold beneath your feet, you realize you're not just witnessing a divine marriage. You're standing inside a system designed to repeat itself forever. Quietly, elegantly, painfully. The cycle has begun. You remain beside Hera as the morning on Olympus stretches out, slow and ceremonial, like a contract being reread for the 1000th time. Nothing dramatic happens at first, and that, you quickly learn, is the point. Divine marriage is not sustained by passion or conflict alone, but by repetition, by ritual, by everyone agreeing to keep playing their assigned role, even when the script is exhausting. You follow Hera through long colonnades where light pools on marble floors in soft rectangles. Every step she takes feels measured, deliberate, as though she's constantly aware that marriage itself is watching her. Because, in a sense, it is. The mainstream historical fact woven into her stride is this. In ancient Greece, marriage was not primarily emotional. It was legal, economic, and political. Hera embodied that reality. She was invoked at weddings not for romance but for legitimacy, continuity, and lawful order. You feel it in the way other gods treat her. They don't flirt, they don't joke carelessly. They lower their voices. Hera is the reminder that actions have names, unions have consequences, and children belong somewhere whether Zeus likes it or not. And honestly, that already makes her the least fun person at the divine party. She pauses at a small shrine tucked into the corridor, an altar dedicated not to herself, but to the abstract concept of union. She straightens a wreath that's drooping slightly. The gesture is tiny, almost invisible, but it carries weight. This is what she does all day, maintenance. Marriage, you're realizing, is less about passion and more about upkeep, like owning a very dramatic house that keeps catching fire. A fringe detail flickers through the mythic background here. Some lesser-known accounts suggest Hera once attempted to withdraw her blessing from marriage altogether, plunging parts of the mortal world into chaos. Unrecognized heirs, disputed lineages, endless legal confusion. You imagine the paperwork alone. The gods, supposedly, begged her to restore order. Whether this myth is literal or symbolic, historians still argue whether it reflects social anxieties around inheritance and legitimacy in early Greek city-states. Standing here, you suspect the ancients knew exactly how fragile the system was. Hera continues walking, and you sense how little room she has to simply exist. Every action reinforces structure. Every silence is interpretive. Even her jealousy, you're starting to understand, isn't about wounded feelings. It's about breach of contract. Zeus doesn't just cheat. He violates cosmic terms he himself enforces. That's the real insult. You pass a gathering of minor deities, preparing for a marriage ceremony between river spirits. Hera stops to observe. She corrects the order of procession. adjusts the timing of vows. She ensures witnesses are present. No shortcuts, no improvisation. This isn't romance, it's infrastructure. And here comes your first sleepy joke of the section. If Hera ran modern weddings, the seating chart would be flawless, the vows legally binding, and the open bar absolutely forbidden until all paperwork was signed. As the ceremony unfolds, you notice Zeus isn't present. Of course he isn't. He rarely is. Hera doesn't comment. She never does. Her power lies in persistence, not confrontation. She watches the vows exchanged, nods once, and moves on. The marriage is now valid. The system holds. For today, you begin to see why leaving Zeus is impossible. Marriage isn't something Hera participates in. It's something she is. If she abandons her role, the concept collapses. Love gods can resign. War gods can nap. But order? Order has no vacation days. A subtle bitterness hums beneath her calm. You catch it in the way her fingers tighten briefly as a messenger approaches. Another rumor. Another friend of Zeus. Another potential complication. She receives the news without reaction. You'd miss it if you weren't paying attention. But you are. You're learning how jealousy operates here. Not explosively, but bureaucratically. A quirky tidbit drifts in. Some ancient storytellers joked that Hera invented bureaucracy purely to cope with Zeus. Forms, delays, procedures. If you can't stop the affairs, at least you can make them inconvenient. Historians still argue whether Hera's portrayal as jealous villain reflects patriarchal discomfort with female authority or a deeper recognition of systemic injustice within divine marriage. You suspect the myths are doing both at once, punishing her for anger while quietly admitting she's right. As the sun climbs higher, Hera returns to her throne. Zeus appears briefly, loud, charming, unbothered. He kisses her cheek in public. The room exhales. Everything looks normal again. That's the trick. The marriage works because it looks intact. You stand there, watching the performance, and you realize something unsettling. Hera's life isn't tragic because Zeus betrays her. It's tragic because she must keep the marriage functioning anyway. Because someone has to hold the contract together, even when the other party treats it like a suggestion. The cycle tightens, just a little. You stay close to Hera as the day settles into its familiar rhythm, the kind of rhythm that doesn't announce itself but presses gently, constantly, like a metronome ticking somewhere behind your thoughts. This is the part of divine life no one writes poems about. No thunder, no scandals yet, just work. Endless, precise, quietly exhausting work. Hera moves through Olympus like someone managing a vast estate that never closes. She receives petitions from minor gods, nymphs, and spirits who all want the same thing: recognition, legitimacy, approval. You begin to understand that marriage, in her domain, is less about romance and more about being seen as valid. Who counts as a wife? Who counts as a child? Who belongs where? The mainstream historical fact grounding this moment is simple but heavy. Hera was invoked as Hera Teleia, the fulfiller, the one who completes marriage rites. Without her blessing, a union was socially and religiously incomplete. You watch that responsibility play out in real time as she listens, nods, and decides, quietly, who gets sanctioned by the system and who does not. She pauses before a group of young goddesses awaiting instruction. Their posture straightens instantly. Hera corrects the way one stands, adjusts another's veil, fixes a clasp that's slightly off-center. These are not aesthetic preferences. These are signals. Order made visible. Marriage, you're learning, communicates through symbols long before words. Here comes another light, sleepy joke drifting in. Hera doesn't raise her voice because she doesn't have to. Her disappointed silence has ended entire bloodlines. A fringe tidbit slips into your awareness as you observe her more closely. Some obscure myths suggest Hera maintained lists, actual mental or divine records of Zeus's affairs, not out of obsession but strategy. Each name, each location, each outcome filed away. You imagine her mind like a vast archive room, shelves neatly labeled, mortal, nymph, Titan adjacent, problem unresolved. Historians still argue whether this depiction of Hera as obsessively jealous was meant as cautionary satire or as a reflection of real anxieties faced by elite women in ancient Greece, whose social power depended entirely on marital legitimacy. Standing beside her now, you feel less like you're watching a villain, and more like you're watching someone doing damage control on a cosmic scale. She stops at a balcony overlooking the mortal world. From here, marriages are happening constantly, some joyous, some strategic, some already cracking under expectation. Hera watches them without sentimentality. Love is not her jurisdiction. Structure is. She ensures vows are witnessed, names recorded, lines drawn cleanly between households. It's unglamorous. It's necessary. A messenger arrives. Another rumor. Zeus again. Of course. Hera doesn't react immediately. She asks one question, calm and precise. Where? Not who. Not why. Just where. Location matters. Consequences are geographically specific. You notice how her jealousy never spills outward randomly. It moves with intention, with timing, with patience. Hera doesn't strike in the moment. She waits until the system can absorb the punishment cleanly. A quirky detail surfaces. Some ancient comedians joked that Hera's true domain wasn't marriage, but delayed revenge. That if you offended her today, you might not notice the consequences until your great-grandchildren were inexplicably cursed with administrative nightmares. Honestly, still relatable. As the afternoon wears on, Hera oversees another ritual. This one dull, procedural, utterly vital. She confirms lineage claims between minor gods. Papers are metaphorical, but the process is unmistakably bureaucratic. You begin to understand something uncomfortable. Hera isn't cruel because she enjoys punishment. She's strict because ambiguity is dangerous. Zeus passes by again, loud, charming, untouched by paperwork or consequences. He jokes with another god. Hera doesn't look at him. She doesn't need to. Her power doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from endurance, from staying in the role no one else wants, but everyone relies on. Historians still argue whether Hera's inability to leave Zeus reflects mythic misogyny, or an acknowledgement that institutions trap even their rulers. Watching her now, you suspect the answer is both. She is queen of marriage, and marriage has made her its prisoner. As evening approaches, Hera returns to her throne, posture perfect, expression unreadable. You feel the weight of her day. Not dramatic, not explosive, just relentless. This is how jealousy grows here. Not as a flare of emotion, but as a byproduct of constant restraint. You sense it settling, slow and inevitable, ready for the next trigger. You're still moving alongside Hera when the atmosphere subtly shifts, the way it does before a storm that everyone pretends not to notice. Nothing explodes. Nothing needs to. Zeus's presence has a way of bending the day around him, even when he isn't technically in the room. And today, his attention has wandered again. You can feel it in the air, like a draft through a closed hall. Hera pauses near a long gallery of statues, former queens, honored wives, idealized unions frozen in marble. This is not coincidence. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this moment is that Zeus's infidelity is one of the most consistent features of Greek myth, while Hera's role remains fixed: lawful wife, protector of marriage, enforcer of legitimacy. The imbalance is structural, not accidental. You watch as a messenger approaches, nervous, over-apologetic. Hera lets him speak. She doesn't interrupt, she doesn't react. She absorbs the information the way stone absorbs heat. Slowly, completely. Another mortal, another disguise, another promise Zeus won't keep. The pattern is so well worn it barely registers as new. Here's the thing you start to realize. Zeus's wandering attention isn't portrayed as cruelty in the myths. It's framed as inevitability, desire as weather, power as entitlement. And Hera is expected to accommodate it without destabilizing the system. That's the real test of her divinity. Not patience, but compliance. A fringe tidbit drifts up from lesser-known traditions. Some myths claim Zeus deliberately flaunted his affairs not out of carelessness, but as a display of dominance, proof that no consequences truly applied to him. Whether this is mythic exaggeration or symbolic critique, historians still argue whether Zeus's behavior reflects ancient power structures or divine parity. Standing here, you suspect the storytellers knew exactly what they were doing. Hera turns away from the statues. She doesn't smash them, she doesn't curse the sky. She resumes walking. This is where her jealousy becomes something more complex than rage. It becomes vigilance, strategy, emotional labor weaponized into foresight. You trail her through corridors where whispers already travel faster than Hermes. Everyone knows. They always do. Minor gods exchange looks. Nymphs avoid eye contact. Not because they fear Hera's temper, but because they fear being noticed, being categorized. Here comes your next light joke, delivered gently enough not to wake anyone. Olympus has no HR department, but Hera is definitely keeping a spreadsheet. She stops at a window overlooking the mortal world again, this time focusing on a specific region. You don't know where Zeus has been yet, but she does. Location dictates response. Hera doesn't lash out blindly. She calibrates. If punishment is coming, it will be precise, proportional, and public enough to reinforce order. A subtle, almost tender moment slips in here. Hera closes her eyes briefly. Just a breath. Not grief, not anger, fatigue. This is the part of the myth cycle most people miss. Jealousy, for her, is exhausting. It's maintenance work no one thanks her for. The mainstream narrative often paints Hera as cruel to Zeus's lovers and children. And yes, that's coming. But standing here now, you feel the cause before the effect. Zeus breaks the contract repeatedly, and Hera is left holding the institution together. Someone has to absorb the fallout. The myths make sure it's her. Historians still argue whether Hera's redirected anger reflects internalized patriarchy or strategic constraint within a system where confronting Zeus directly would destabilize cosmic order. Watching her now, you see the calculation behind every silence. Rage, here, would be inefficient. Another quirky detail surfaces. Some ancient storytellers claimed Hera could predict Zeus's affairs before they happened, simply by noting when he suddenly became generous or philosophical. You imagine her recognizing the signs, the way someone recognizes a familiar headache forming. Preventable, inevitable. As the afternoon drags on, Zeus finally appears. Cheerful, unconcerned, already moving past whatever he's done. He greets Hera publicly, affectionately. The performance is flawless. She responds with perfect composure. Olympus relaxes again. Crisis averted. For now. But you know better. You've seen how the system works. Zeus's wandering attention doesn't end the marriage. It feeds the cycle. Hera's jealousy doesn't explode. It accumulates. And somewhere, quietly, consequences are already being scheduled. You stay close as Hera's attention sharpens, not outwardly, never outwardly, but inwardly, like a blade being honed behind velvet curtains. This is the phase most mortals misunderstand. Jealousy, in Hera's world, is not a loss of control. It is a function, a tool, a mechanism that activates when the system is threatened. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this moment is essential. In Greek myth, Hera's jealousy is not random emotional volatility, but a recurring narrative engine. It drives consequences, reinforces boundaries, and, crucially, protects the sanctity of lawful marriage. Without jealousy, Hera would be irrelevant. With it, she becomes feared, remembered, and obeyed. You begin to see how jealousy operates like a sensor. Zeus's infidelity triggers it the way pressure triggers a valve. Something must be released, redirected, managed. Hera cannot punish Zeus directly, not without unraveling the very hierarchy she upholds, so the force moves sideways, downward, into the lives of others. You follow her into quieter halls where decisions are made without witnesses. Hera sits, composed, hands folded, eyes distant. She is not imagining revenge. She is calculating impact. Who will learn from this? Who will serve as example? Who can absorb the consequence without breaking the system? A fringe tidbit floats into your awareness. Some lesser-known myths suggest Hera believed jealousy was divinely necessary, a stabilizing emotion meant to discourage chaos. In this telling, her rage isn't spiteful, it's corrective. Historians still argue whether this reflects ancient moral reasoning or a post hoc justification for cruelty embedded in myth. Standing beside her now, you sense the uncomfortable truth that both can exist at once. A minor deity approaches, trembling slightly, carrying news of a child. Zeus's child, mortal mother. Innocent circumstances. You feel the tension thicken. This is where modern listeners often want Hera to soften, to rise above it, to be better. But Olympus is not a therapy session, it is an institution. Here comes your next light joke, quiet and dry. If this were a modern drama, someone would suggest communication, and everyone would immediately be turned into an animal. Hera listens. She nods once. The decision is not spoken aloud yet, but it has been made. You notice how little emotion crosses her face. This isn't fury. It's enforcement. The child represents a crack in the system, a reminder that Zeus's actions blur boundaries Hera exists to maintain. The mainstream myths often depict her punishing the child or the mother, and yes, that pattern will repeat. But here, in the calm before action, you feel the moral tension more clearly. Hera is not blind to innocence. She simply prioritizes order over fairness. In a universe where lineage defines everything, ambiguity is intolerable. Historians still argue whether Hera's actions toward Zeus's offspring reflect internalized misogyny or a symbolic warning about the consequences of unchecked male power. You suspect the storytellers wanted audiences to sit with that discomfort, even if later retellings sanded it down into villainy. A quirky detail surfaces from fringe accounts. Some myths claim Hera delays punishment deliberately, allowing hope to grow before extinguishing it. Not out of sadism, but to ensure the lesson sticks. You don't know if that's true, but watching her now, you understand how patience can be more terrifying than rage. As evening approaches, Hera rises. The decision will ripple outward soon, into mortal lives, into myth, into cautionary tale. She doesn't announce it. She doesn't need to. Olympus feels it already, like a pressure change before a storm. You realize something important here. Hera's jealousy is not a flaw in the system. It is the system responding to threat. Zeus disrupts. Hera corrects. Over and over again. That's the cycle. And as you follow her into the fading light, you sense that this correction, whatever form it takes, will not end the wandering. It never does. It only resets the balance temporarily. The cycle tightens again, ready for its next turn. You move with Hera into the aftermath phase, the part of the cycle where consequences unfold but responsibility remains carefully misassigned. This is where her reputation hardens, where stories remember her as cruel rather than constrained. And you're close enough now to see how deliberate that misdirection really is. The mainstream historical fact grounding this stretch of the story is familiar, but often oversimplified. In Greek mythology, Hera rarely punishes Zeus directly for his infidelities. Instead, her wrath falls on his lovers and their children, figures with far less power to resist. This pattern has echoed for thousands of years, and it's the reason Hera is remembered more for jealousy than justice. You watch the process begin, not with thunder or curses, but with distance. Hera withdraws her protection. That's all it takes. In this universe, divine favor isn't a bonus. It's structural support. Remove it, and gravity does the rest. A mortal woman, unnamed, which is already telling, loses her footing socially, spiritually, mythically. Whispers spread. Opportunities close. Fate narrows. Hera doesn't need to lift a finger. This is the punishment Olympus understands best. Exclusion from legitimacy. A fringe tidbit surfaces here, uncomfortable and sharp. Some obscure myths suggest Hera believed punishing Zeus directly would only reinforce his dominance, turning conflict into spectacle. By redirecting consequences downward, she preserved the appearance of order while still asserting control over outcomes. Historians still argue whether this reflects strategic intelligence or tragic accommodation within patriarchal systems. Standing beside her, you suspect it's both, and neither option is good. Here comes your next gentle joke, whispered like an aside so it doesn't wake anyone. Zeus breaks the rules. Hera enforces them. Everyone else gets detention. You feel the moral dissonance settle in. The targets of Hera's anger are often the least culpable. Mortal women seduced by a god don't consent the way gods do. Children don't choose their parents. And yet, myth after myth shows Hera making examples of them. This isn't random cruelty. It's systemic logic applied without mercy. She watches from a distance as the consequences ripple outward. A child grows up marked by hardship. A lineage fractures. A story becomes a warning. Hera does not intervene, not because she lacks compassion, but because compassion here would undermine the lesson. The system must appear impartial, even when it isn't. Historians still argue whether Hera's punishments functioned as social control myths, warnings to mortal women about fidelity, ambition, and proximity to power. You can feel that intent in the air. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were instructions. A quirky detail drifts in from fringe storytelling traditions. Some claimed Hera sometimes offered mercy quietly after the myth ended. Small restorations no poet bothered to record. A softened fate. A shortened curse. You don't know if that's true. But you notice how rarely she celebrates punishment. There is no triumph here, only completion. As night approaches, Zeus laughs somewhere distant. The imbalance remains intact. Hera returns to her chambers, not satisfied, not relieved, just steady. The system has been corrected for now. Order restored at a cost no one names. You realize that this is how Hera survives her role. By turning pain into precedent. By ensuring every breach teaches something, even if the lesson is cruel. especially if the lesson is cruel. The cycle moves forward, not resolved, but reinforced, ready for the next violation, the next correction, the next story that will remember her wrong and forget why. You remain with Hera as her attention shifts outward again, this time toward the mortal world, where the ripples of divine marriage are felt most sharply. This is where her jealousy intersects with something quieter but heavier: expectation. The expectation placed on women to maintain order they did not design, to absorb consequences they did not cause, and to represent ideals they were never allowed to define. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this section is foundational. Hera was widely worshipped by mortal women, especially brides and wives, who prayed to her for stability, fertility, and lawful standing. She was not feared only as a jealous goddess, she was relied upon as a protector. That contradiction sits at the heart of her mythology, and you feel it now as she watches mortal households rise and fracture beneath her gaze. You stand beside her at a high terrace overlooking cities, villages, and quiet domestic spaces. Weddings are happening below. Simple, strategic, hopeful. Hera does not smile, but she does attend. Her presence settles like a seal pressed into wax. These unions now count. They are recognized. That recognition is everything. A fringe tidbit slips in, subtle and unsettling. Some lesser-known myths suggest Hera deliberately favored faithful mortal wives, granting them quiet prosperity or social endurance rather than happiness. Not joy, stability. Historians still argue whether this reflects ancient ideals of womanhood or a warning about the emotional cost of endurance. Watching now, you suspect Hera knows exactly what she is offering and what she is withholding. Here comes your next light joke, delivered softly. Hera doesn't promise a fairy tale ending, just a legally binding one. You notice how her attention lingers on women more than men. Mortal husbands move freely, rarely scrutinized. Wives are watched, measured, expected to represent the marriage even when the marriage fails them. Hera sees herself in them, whether she wants to or not. Her jealousy toward Zeus's lovers doesn't erase this identification. It sharpens it. She observes a household where a husband strays. The wife remains. The community quietly blames her anyway. Hera's fingers tighten slightly. This is familiar. This is personal. But again, she does not intervene directly. The system reinforces itself without divine assistance. Historians still argue whether Hera's harsh treatment of other women reflects internalized misogyny or mythic realism about limited avenues of power. Standing here, you feel the tragedy of both interpretations. Hera cannot dismantle the structure without destroying her own domain. So she enforces it, even when it mirrors her pain. A quirky detail surfaces from fringe traditions. Some claimed Hera occasionally appeared to mortal women in dreams, not as a queen, but as an older wife offering wordless understanding. No solutions, no escape, just recognition. You don't know if that comfort mattered, but you imagine it did. As the day fades, Hera turns back toward Olympus. The mortal world continues its cycles. Marriage, betrayal, endurance, largely unaware of the goddess watching above. You realize something quietly devastating. Hera's jealousy is not just about Zeus. It's about seeing her own story replayed endlessly below. She returns to her throne, posture perfect, expression composed. The cycle doesn't pause. It doesn't soften. It simply continues, carried by expectation, reinforced by silence, and sanctified by ritual. And you stay with her, understanding now that jealousy here is not merely personal. It is cultural, institutional, passed down like an inheritance no one can refuse. You follow Hera into a quieter register of Olympus now, where symbols matter more than spectacle and punishment arrives disguised as ritual. This is where her jealousy becomes almost elegant, wrapped in ceremony, myth, and transformation so subtle that it barely registers as cruelty until it's far too late. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this stretch is that many of Hera's most famous acts of vengeance are symbolic rather than directly violent. Transformations, curses of form or status, enforced roles, these are her tools: sacred cows, endless wandering, sleepless guardianship. Punishments that look ceremonial, but function as lifelong reminders of deviation. You watch as she pauses near a shrine, adorned with images of cattle, peacocks, and watchful eyes. These are not decorative, they are language. Hera communicates through symbols the way Zeus communicates through lightning. Quietly, permanently. A fringe tidbit slides into place here. Some lesser-known traditions claim Hera preferred symbolic punishments because they could be endlessly referenced. A transformed woman becomes a walking warning. A ritualized curse becomes a story retold at weddings and hearths. Historians still argue whether these myths functioned as social regulation tools, teaching boundaries through narrative rather than law. Standing here, you feel how effective that strategy is. Here comes your next gentle joke, barely above a whisper. Hera doesn't yell, she rebrands you as a cautionary tale. You sense how carefully she chooses form over force. A rival might become an animal, not to erase them, but to reposition them, lower in the hierarchy, visible but powerless. A punishment that doesn't end a life, just redefines it. The system stays intact, order is reinforced. Hera walks among altars where offerings are placed in her name. Many of them are made by women. You notice the irony immediately. The same goddess who punishes other women is also the one women trust to protect their marriages. The contradiction is not accidental. It's the cost of limited power in a rigid system. Historians still argue whether Hera's symbolic punishments were meant to elicit fear or understanding. Watching her now, you realize they do both. Fear keeps people in line. Understanding keeps them from asking for escape. A quirky detail surfaces from fringe mythic humor. Some ancient audiences reportedly laughed at Hera's more elaborate curses, finding them excessive, theatrical, even petty. You imagine those listeners, safe, removed, entertained, never imagining themselves as the subject of ritualized correction. As night deepens, Hera completes a final offering, precise and wordless. The punishment, whatever form it takes, has been set in motion. It will unfold slowly, invisibly, wrapped in tradition. No thunder, no spectacle, just permanence. You realize now that Hera's jealousy doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through symbols, rituals, and stories that outlive everyone involved. This is how she maintains order without open rebellion. This is how resentment becomes religion. And as you follow her back through the marble halls, you understand that the most enduring punishments are the ones that look sacred. You stay with Hera as the consequences she set in motion begin to stretch far beyond the moment that created them. This is where her true strength reveals itself. Not in anger, not even in punishment, but in memory. Hera remembers. And on Olympus, memory is power. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this section is often overlooked. Hera is one of the few Olympians consistently depicted as holding long-term grudges that span generations. In myth, her actions rarely end with a single individual. They echo through bloodlines, cities, and reputations. This is not impulsive vengeance. It is continuity enforced. You notice it in the way she reviews names, places, and lineages, with the calm precision of someone cataloging history as it happens. Zeus forgets. Hera archives. Every slight, every breach, every child born outside the contract is stored, not emotionally but structurally. These are variables in a system she must maintain. A fringe tidbit drifts into your awareness here. Some lesser-known traditions claim Hera possessed prophetic insight not into the future, but into patterns. She didn't need to know what would happen. She knew what always happened. Historians still argue whether this reflects early Greek ideas about fate as cyclical rather than linear. Standing beside her now, you feel how inevitability replaces surprise. Here comes your next light joke, soft enough to blend into the marble halls. Zeus lives in the moment. Hera lives in the footnotes. She pauses before a set of genealogical markers, symbolic representations of divine and semi-divine families. You sense how deeply invested she is in lineage. Marriage creates legitimacy. Illegitimacy creates instability. Hera's jealousy, here, is a defensive reaction to disorder spreading across time. You begin to understand that her punishments are rarely meant to satisfy the present. They are messages aimed at the future. Warnings encoded into myths so that generations later someone still hesitates before crossing a boundary. Historians still argue whether Hera's fixation on lineage reflects ancient anxieties about inheritance and citizenship, especially in patriarchal societies where bloodlines define power. Watching her now, you see how myth becomes policy. Story becomes structure. A quirky detail surfaces from fringe storytelling. Some myths claimed Hera could recognize descendants of Zeus's affairs generations later, sensing a faint imbalance around them. Whether literal or symbolic, the idea reinforces her role as guardian of continuity. Nothing slips entirely past her. As the day stretches on, Hera returns again and again to the same quiet tasks: reviewing, observing, remembering. Zeus moves on. Affairs fade. Names blur. But Hera remains anchored to the long view. This is why her jealousy feels eternal. It isn't tied to a moment. It's tied to repetition. You feel a chill at the thought. To Hera, forgiveness would mean forgetting, and forgetting would mean failure. The system survives because she refuses to let go. As evening settles, you realize that what mortals call pettiness is, in fact, institutional memory. And memory, once embedded into myth, never really dies. The cycle stretches backward and forward at once, held together by a goddess who remembers everything. You remain beside Hera as the day wanes into late afternoon, the light on Olympus softening into a golden haze that makes marble shimmer like molten cream. You notice how every shadow seems measured, deliberate, an echo of her influence. This is the long memory of Olympus in action. Not in words, not in fire, but in quiet, meticulous presence. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this moment is that Hera's enduring grudges and long-term interventions shaped myths as much as Zeus's exploits. Whereas Zeus could act impulsively, storming into battles, seducing mortals, or wielding lightning, Hera's power is patient. She accumulates, remembers, and waits. Legends preserve her decisions because they unfold slowly, often beyond mortal comprehension. You watch her move along a balcony overlooking the clouds. Somewhere below, mortals unknowingly follow the guidelines her presence enforces. A marriage ends quietly. A child is marked by circumstance. Someone makes a mistake that would have gone unnoticed if Hera hadn't been watching generations ahead. The ripple effect of her memory is invisible, but unstoppable. A fringe tidbit drifts into your awareness. Some myths claim Hera keeps mental ledgers so precise that she can recall the names of Zeus's lovers and their descendants centuries later. She tracks loyalties, betrayals, and the resulting consequences as if the events are all points on a celestial spreadsheet. Historians still argue whether this portrayal is symbolic of divine omniscience or a narrative device emphasizing gendered vigilance. Standing beside her now, you sense how literal or metaphorical the effect is the same. Nothing escapes her. Here comes your next soft joke, barely audible over the breeze. Zeus forgets birthdays. Hera remembers them all with annotations. Hera's eyes linger on a tiny mortal settlement. You notice her subtle adjustments to the world's invisible order, nudges that ensure contracts hold, children are recognized, and the social web remains unbroken. Jealousy here has transformed into foresight. The anger that once threatened the innocent is now a tool for preservation, guiding actions indirectly and effectively. Historians still argue whether Hera's strategic patience is evidence of narrative misogyny, punishing those powerless instead of challenging Zeus, or of sophisticated storytelling designed to illustrate cosmic order. Observing her now, you realize it might be both, intertwined into a single complex character who defies easy moral categorization. A quirky detail surfaces from the myths. Some traditions claim Hera can summon small reminders of past grievances in mortal dreams. Images of punished transgressors, subtle warnings, or fleeting visions of divine oversight. These interventions are symbolic, almost playful, yet their effects ripple through the waking world. You imagine the mortals waking in uneasy clarity, never fully sure if it was a dream or a lesson. As the light shifts toward evening, Hera glances briefly at Zeus, who is entertaining minor deities elsewhere, entirely oblivious to the structural recalibrations she maintains. She doesn't scowl. She doesn't speak. Her presence alone is a calibration, a force field of legitimacy, restraint, and quiet power. You feel the weight of the system she upholds. Olympus doesn't collapse not because Zeus is restrained, but because Hera remembers, acts, and enforces consequences across time. Every infidelity, every breach of order, every moral misstep is cataloged, addressed, or redirected in ways that maintain the balance. And you realize that this is her true domain, not thunder, not storms, not spectacle, memory, patience, calculation, endless, quiet, eternal vigilance. The long memory of Olympus is Hera, and it never rests. You walk with Hera as twilight deepens, turning Olympus into a place of shifting shadows and faint golden glows. The marble corridors now hold a kind of hush, as if even the stones themselves understand that the goddess's attention is everywhere at once. This is when her vigilance becomes almost invisible, but no less potent. The mainstream historical fact here is that Hera's mythology consistently links her to the protection and enforcement of lawful marriage. She is not invoked for passion or desire, but for enduring stability and societal structure. This is reflected in countless rituals. Brides prayed to her for safe unions, legitimate children, and protection from infidelity. She embodies the framework more than the emotion, and you feel it in the way she moves, methodical, deliberate, almost ceremonial, even in private moments. You watch as she pauses at a balcony overlooking a valley, where mortal couples move through the rituals of everyday life. You notice subtle nudges in her presence, a sway of authority that ensures nothing veers too far from precedent. Even if Zeus is elsewhere, his breaches are felt here, mediated through her. Jealousy becomes vigilance, punishment becomes oversight, and restraint becomes power. A fringe tidbit drifts into the narrative. Some myths claim Hera could identify illegitimate lines simply by sensing subtle disruptions in ritual or household order. Historians still argue whether this reflects real ancient anxieties about inheritance or is simply mythic exaggeration. But the point is clear. Her awareness is omnipresent. You imagine her cataloging every detail, no matter how small, like a divine archivist keeping every piece of the system in balance. A quiet joke rises to your mind. Zeus forgets birthdays. Hera invents entire family trees just to keep him accountable. You notice that Hera doesn't confront those she punishes in person. She allows the consequences to cascade naturally through social structures, divine oversight, or narrative inevitability. Her anger is indirect, slow-moving, and enduring. That's why mortals fear her. That's why minor gods give a wide berth. And that's why her jealousy feels eternal, not because it flares, but because it's never released. It accumulates and shapes reality. Historians still argue whether this method of punishment, indirect, symbolic, and systemic, was a reflection of patriarchal anxieties or an acknowledgement of female strategy in a male-dominated pantheon. Observing her now, you realize it is both. Narrative justice and political calculation intertwined into one divine personality. A quirky detail floats in. Some myths suggest Hera enjoyed giving gifts to mortals or lesser gods who honored her faithfully, but withheld them from those who merely claimed virtue. Reward, like punishment, is carefully measured. You see her nod subtly toward a young nymph whose offerings were correct. The nymph glows faintly with the kind of recognition that is both terrifying and comforting. As night falls fully over Olympus, Hera returns to her central hall. Zeus is distant, amused elsewhere. The day's cycles, affairs, whispers, minor chaos have all been accounted for. Her system remains intact. You notice that her presence now radiates quiet authority, not the explosive dominance of Zeus, not the allure of fleeting passion, but something slower, steadier, and fundamentally enduring. It is what maintains Olympus itself, and as you trail behind her, you understand something quietly devastating. In this world, jealousy is not about rage. It is the backbone of order, the unseen architecture of consequence. And Hera is the architect. You remain with Hera as the night deepens over Olympus, the stars above the peaks twinkling faintly like distant witnesses to a drama that never ends. You notice how she moves through the corridors now, not with the urgency of immediate action, but with the steady precision of someone maintaining a world that could collapse in an instant. This is the long game, and jealousy is only the tip of its machinery. The mainstream historical fact here is that Hera's role as guardian of marriage was institutionalized in Greek religion. She was worshipped not as a goddess of love, but as a stabilizing force, the enforcer of lawful unions. Her temples and altars were places where mortals sought legitimacy, protection, and continuity. In this quiet part of the night, you can feel why her influence was considered essential. She keeps order while Zeus pursues his whims. A fringe tidbit drifts into view. Some ancient accounts suggest Hera had a network of divine informants, minor gods, nymphs, and even sacred animals, that reported back to her about mortal and divine misdeeds. Historians still argue whether these accounts reflect literal beliefs or symbolic commentary on female oversight and authority in ancient societies. Observing her now, it's easy to see how she could process so many infractions simultaneously, recording them without ever needing to act immediately. You watch as she pauses at a balcony, looking down at the mortal world below. Couples argue softly in the moonlight. Children wander uncertainly, and minor gods go about their chores, unaware of her subtle interventions. Hera doesn't need to intervene directly. Her presence alone recalibrates behavior. It's the cosmic equivalent of a teacher walking silently down a classroom aisle. Everyone straightens up without being told why. A soft joke creeps in. If Zeus were immortal, he'd be grounded for life. And Hera would be the kind of parent who assigns extra homework, just to make a point. Hera's gaze lingers on a mortal woman trying to maintain her household while her husband flirts with another. You can see the tension, the quiet, systemic pressure that Hera exerts. Punishment isn't always loud or immediate. Sometimes it's the subtle denial of favor, the ripple that changes someone's prospects in ways no one else notices. Her jealousy operates invisibly, but it's precise. Every overlooked detail becomes a lesson encoded into fate itself. Historians still argue whether Hera's interventions in mortal lives were meant as cautionary tales, reflections of female authority, or expressions of divine moral order. You realize they are all of these things at once. Her power is multidimensional, punitive, protective, instructional, and always precise. A quirky mythological detail surfaces. Some stories suggest Hera could manipulate minor gods' perceptions, making them see things differently to encourage correct behavior. A nymph might suddenly understand she has transgressed boundaries, without a word from Hera. You see the methodical logic behind it, teaching through perception rather than punishment, so lessons endure longer. As the night deepens, Zeus is nowhere in sight, either asleep or gallivanting elsewhere. Hera doesn't check. She doesn't fret. The system doesn't require constant supervision from her alone. It runs through her presence, her memory, her unseen adjustments. Olympus functions not because Zeus obeys rules, but because Hera enforces consequences across time, space, and circumstance. You feel the weight of her role settling on you. Jealousy is merely a signal, patience a weapon, and vigilance the medium through which order persists. And in this quiet hour, you begin to understand that Hera's power is terrifying, not because of violence, but because it is relentless, systematic, and eternal. You follow Hera into the deepest, most contemplative hours of Olympus night, when the marble halls echo only faintly with distant laughter or whispers, and the air itself seems to hold its breath. Here, away from Zeus's constant interruptions and the bustle of minor deities, her role as the enforcer of order becomes most palpable. It is in these moments that her jealousy takes on its full character, patient, methodical, inescapable. The mainstream historical fact grounding this segment is clear. Hera was consistently depicted as a deity who maintained the social and divine order through oversight, ritual enforcement, and intervention when boundaries were breached. Unlike Zeus, whose impulses sparked chaos, Hera's interventions were structured, deliberate, and often invisible. Myth preserves her as the stabilizer, the one who ensures continuity and legitimacy, often at great personal cost. You watch her pause at a series of ceremonial halls where past punishments are remembered in statues, inscriptions, and offerings. These memorials serve as both warning and record. Each one embodies a story, a cautionary tale, and a reinforcement of her authority. In a way, jealousy has transformed into historical curation. Every slight, betrayal, or infidelity is documented, remembered, and encoded into ritual. A fringe tidbit drifts into view. Some minor texts suggest Hera maintained divine ledgers of Zeus's exploits, tracking mortal and divine interactions with exacting precision. Historians still argue whether these accounts reflect literal belief or symbolic commentary on oversight and control in myth. Regardless, observing Hera now, you see how meticulous, how calculated, and how patient her management of transgressions really is. It is an administration of consequences stretched across generations. You notice a subtle smile cross her face, quiet, almost imperceptible, as she observes a mortal couple rehearsing vows under the moonlight. Not satisfaction, not triumph. Recognition, order preserved, stability achieved. Even her pleasure is measured, filtered through the lens of duty rather than sentiment. Here comes your next light joke, whispered like a breeze. Zeus's idea of romance is a whirlwind. Hera's idea is a spreadsheet. She walks through the halls, and you begin to see how her presence alone shapes the world. A minor god hesitates before acting improperly. A mortal woman instinctively follows tradition. Her influence doesn't need theatrics. It is embedded, subtle, and omnipresent. Jealousy has become a tool of guidance, restraint, and instruction. Historians still argue whether Hera's role in punishing Zeus's lovers and illegitimate children represents narrative misogyny or a demonstration of systemic maintenance in mythology. You sense that in the stories both interpretations coexist: cruelty for the powerless, structure for the cosmos, and lessons that echo through time. Her jealousy, patience, and vigilance are inseparable. A quirky detail emerges. Some myths imply Hera occasionally altered mortal dreams to reinforce lessons subtly, sending visions of consequences or reminders of social rules. No force applied, no voice raised, just perception nudged until the lesson was understood. You feel how effective that could be: invisible, enduring, and psychologically precise. As dawn creeps near, Hera returns to her central chamber, unmoved by Zeus's absence or his carefree wandering elsewhere. The system she maintains, marital, familial, divine, remain intact. You realize that in Hera's world, jealousy isn't impulsive or emotional. It is administration, strategy, and eternal vigilance wrapped into a single, relentless presence. And standing beside her, you understand that Olympus itself functions, because someone never forgets, never yields, and never mistakes patience for weakness. You walk with Hera as dawn begins to color the horizon with pale gold and lilac, and Olympus wakes slowly to a new day. The marble corridors gleam softly, reflecting the first light, yet the weight of Hera's vigilance remains unchanged. You notice how her presence feels heavier in the morning, not because of anger, but because of responsibility. Each day brings new infractions, new mortal marriages, new ripples of Zeus's wanderings. The mainstream historical fact here is that Hera's mythic role consistently connects her to oversight, law, and legitimacy in marital and familial structures. She is not merely a jealous goddess. She is a guardian of order. Her interventions, while sometimes harsh, function to stabilize a chaotic divine world. Today you see that stability in action. Small, precise adjustments that prevent crises before they erupt. You follow her to a terrace overlooking mortal villages, where couples begin their daily routines. Her gaze settles on households that are already at risk. Husbands prone to wandering attention, children born under ambiguous circumstances, marriages lacking ritual acknowledgement. Her influence is subtle. She nudges perception, encourages correct behavior, and ensures that consequences ripple naturally through mortal and minor divine systems. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some obscure myths claim Hera could sense potential breaches before they occurred, particularly where Zeus or other gods were involved. Historians still argue whether this predictive ability was literal or symbolic, but you sense her awareness operates in patterns, probabilities, and subtle signals rather than brute intervention. It's almost as if she reads the world like a series of equations, adjusting outcomes without ever raising a hand. You notice a small group of mortal women preparing for weddings. They lay offerings and perform minor rituals, not knowing Hera observes. Some myths suggest she rewards fidelity with stability, quiet prosperity, and social recognition. You begin to understand the duality. Punishment is visible, dramatic, and recorded. Favor is subtle, enduring, and rarely noted. Hera's power manifests in both realms. A soft joke drifts in. Zeus organizes storms. Hera organizes spreadsheets of human behavior. You can almost hear the faint exasperation in her eyes. One immortal juggling a lifetime of chaos, while another flits around like a breeze, oblivious to consequence. Historians still argue whether Hera's interventions were intended to teach lessons to mortals or to symbolically reinforce divine hierarchy. Standing beside her now, it becomes evident that it is both. Every punishment, every favor, every nudge reinforces the idea that Olympus has rules, even if Zeus acts as though it doesn't. You notice the way minor gods react to her in the morning. They straighten immediately, aware that she remembers every transgression from the previous day. Her presence is calibration, correction, and warning all at once. No sermon needed. Everything is understood. This is the essence of her jealousy: patient, pervasive, precise, and eternal. Hera pauses briefly to observe Zeus from a distance. He smiles, charming, unconcerned, entirely absorbed in his own world. She does not scowl, she does not confront. Her response is systematic. Consequences have already been planned, patterns recorded, lessons set in motion. Jealousy here is less emotion and more architecture. As the morning progresses, you feel the full weight of Hera's cycle: observation, assessment, judgment, correction. Olympus does not collapse not because Zeus obeys, but because Hera enforces consequences across time and space. And you realize, with a quiet awe, that jealousy in her hands is a sustaining force, as essential as law or ritual. You continue walking with Hera as the morning deepens into midday, the sunlight spilling over Olympus like warm honey over marble steps. The palace hums softly with minor activity: nymphs carrying messages, minor deities polishing offerings, and servants quietly attending to the routines that ensure divine life remains uninterrupted. But Hera's attention is elsewhere, focused on the invisible currents that ripple from Zeus's latest wandering indulgences and the mortal world below. The mainstream historical fact framing this moment is that Hera's mythology consistently positions her as the enforcer of divine and mortal law, especially regarding marriage, legitimacy, and social hierarchy. She rarely acts impulsively. Her interventions are deliberate and precise. Today, you witness that structure in motion. Decisions made in silence, with the potential to reshape lives both mortal and immortal. You follow her to a private terrace, where she scans the valleys and cities below. Her eyes settle on several households. Marriages strained, children born under ambiguous circumstances, minor divine figures who have overstepped their bounds. Hera's presence alone alters probabilities. Not a hand raised, not a curse spoken, just the gravitational pull of her vigilance, bending outcomes toward order. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some obscure myths claim Hera could weigh mortal households spiritually, sensing imbalances long before they manifested as crisis. Historians still argue whether these abilities were literal belief or allegorical expressions of social control, but you realize her awareness operates with a logic akin to probability management, reading patterns, noting breaches, predicting consequences without overt intervention. You notice a small mortal wedding below. Hera observes the bride nervously adjusting her veil, the groom fumbling with his vows. Minor infractions are already present. A hand lingered too long, a gaze misplaced. Her presence subtly enforces decorum. The bride breathes a little steadier. The groom straightens. Ceremony proceeds with precision. Favor is quiet. Consequences unfold slowly. It is the silent orchestration of life that defines Hera's power. A soft joke drifts in your thoughts. Zeus gives a storm for dramatic flair. Hera gives a lifetime of quiet accountability. Historians still argue whether Hera's interventions were primarily social, designed to reinforce moral structures among mortals, or whether they symbolized cosmic law within the pantheon itself. Watching her now, you feel both simultaneously, divine oversight and moral guidance intertwined, manifesting through observation and subtle influence rather than open action. A quirky mythological detail surfaces. Some traditions suggest Hera occasionally communicated with mortals through dreams, not as warnings but as gentle nudges, reminders of the balance she maintained. You sense that these interventions were rare, careful, and almost playful in their execution, ensuring that her system of order remained intact without overt violence. As the day reaches its peak, you see Hera return inside, passing altars and statues, each one a marker of her vigilance. Zeus's absence or casual whims no longer matter. The consequences she has orchestrated, the favors she has granted, and the lessons she has encoded continue to unfold naturally. Her jealousy has become invisible administration, patient, pervasive, and precise. Standing beside her now, you understand the quiet terror and enduring power of Hera's vigilance. Jealousy here is not about emotion. It is order, history, and architecture. It is as essential to Olympus as sunlight or marble, ensuring that every infraction is accounted for and every lesson endures across generations. You remain close to Hera as the afternoon stretches into the later hours, a golden haze spilling across Olympus that softens the sharp edges of the marble halls. The palace hums faintly with minor activities, servants adjusting ceremonial garments, nymphs delivering messages, and lesser gods scuttling about with their endless chores. But Hera walks above it all, serene yet taut, as if the very weight of order itself presses upon her shoulders. You notice that this vigilance is never idle. Every glance, every gesture, every pause is loaded with intention. The mainstream historical fact grounding this section is that Hera's mythology positions her as a stabilizing force who maintains boundaries among gods and mortals alike. While Zeus's impulsivity drives chaos, Hera's jealousy is systematic, applied strategically to ensure the continuity of marriage, inheritance, and social structure. Observing her, you see how she doesn't punish recklessly. She calculates, balances, and allows consequences to unfold precisely where they are most instructive. A fringe detail drifts in. Some minor traditions suggest Hera could influence divine and mortal behavior subtly, nudging perception to prevent transgressions before they occurred. Historians still debate whether these stories were meant to be taken literally or symbolically as an allegory for social enforcement, but in the presence of Hera, you feel their logic. Even without words, she orchestrates outcomes, ensuring order persists without overt intervention. You notice her attention lingering on a mortal household below, a husband's wandering eye, a wife's anxious adjustments, and children moving uncertainly through ritualized routines. She does not act openly. There are no thunderbolts, no curses, no dramatic proclamations. Instead, she adjusts favor subtly, guides perception imperceptibly, and allows natural consequence to do the heavy work. Her jealousy has become strategy. A gentle joke surfaces. Zeus writes checks with abandon. Hera audits the ledger. You can't help but chuckle softly, imagining the absurdity of cosmic accounting. But here, it is deadly serious. Every detail counts, and nothing escapes her notice. Historians still argue whether Hera's focus on punishing others for Zeus's infidelities was an expression of patriarchal bias or a sophisticated narrative device, emphasizing the necessity of structural enforcement. Watching her now, you understand that it is both. Justice disguised as vengeance, discipline disguised as emotion. A quirky tidbit emerges from fringe mythologies. Some claim Hera occasionally transforms minor gods into objects of symbolic lesson. Peacocks, cows, or even abstract representations to illustrate consequences without harming them directly. You sense the elegance in this approach, punishment and pedagogy combined, visible yet indirect. As the late afternoon shadows stretch across Olympus, Hera returns toward her central hall, her presence both calm and unyielding. Zeus's absence, his whims and his distractions do not disturb her. The system she maintains, the moral, social, and divine equilibrium, continues to function because she remembers, because she observes, and because she acts not with passion but with precision. Her jealousy is no longer raw emotion. It is architecture, enduring and unassailable. You realize, with a quiet awe, that Olympus survives not because of the gods' power alone, but because someone ensures that all consequences, all lessons, all balances are accounted for, and that someone is Hera. You follow Hera into the dimming light of early evening, when Olympus softens into a palette of lavender and silver, and the marble halls take on an almost liquid quality under the fading sun. Everything slows, yet her vigilance does not. You notice how even in these quiet moments, every movement is deliberate, every glance purposeful. Jealousy, you begin to see, has become something more, a tool for preservation, a lens through which she measures order, continuity, and legitimacy. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this section is that Hera's role in mythology is deeply intertwined with the sanctity and stability of marriage, both mortal and divine. She acts as an enforcer of social and cosmic norms, often in ways that are subtle, indirect, and enduring. Unlike Zeus, whose impulsive acts spark chaos, Hera administers consequences in a measured, almost bureaucratic fashion. You witness her observing Olympus with the quiet authority of someone who manages systems rather than merely rules by emotion. A fringe tidbit drifts into your awareness. Some ancient texts suggest Hera could manipulate perception to teach lessons without direct confrontation. Mortals and minor gods might find themselves subtly redirected, nudged toward the choices that align with cosmic order. Historians still debate whether these stories were intended literally or symbolically, yet you sense their logic as you watch Hera at work. Her influence is pervasive but almost invisible. Below, in a mortal village, a newlywed couple navigates the rituals of daily life. You see her attention on minor details, the wife hesitating over a domestic duty, the husband distracted by fleeting desire, children moving through the household unaware of the gaze above. Hera does not act overtly, she doesn't punish immediately. Instead, the consequences ripple through the family, society, and myth itself, a quiet but unyielding correction. A soft joke surfaces in your mind. Zeus redecorates chaos. Hera maintains the warranty. It's almost funny, but you feel the precision behind the humor. This is not random. It is law enforced with patience. Historians still argue whether Hera's indirect punishments of mortals and minor deities serve as allegories for structural enforcement, or are simply reflections of misogynistic narrative patterns. Standing here, you realize it is both, a narrative of discipline and a demonstration of authority encoded in myth and ritual. A quirky detail appears from fringe traditions. Some myths claim Hera could subtly remind mortals of previous transgressions by manifesting faint omens, such as flickering lights, shifting shadows, or symbolic animals, prompting reflection without confrontation. You notice the elegance in these methods. Every nudge precise, every lesson encoded, and every consequence enduring. As evening deepens, Hera returns to her throne. Zeus continues elsewhere, oblivious to the invisible architecture maintaining Olympus. You realize that her jealousy is not impulsive rage. It is administration, foresight, and careful calibration. The pantheon endures not because of unchecked power, but because she ensures that the system, flawed yet stable, continues without collapse. And you understand, finally, that jealousy in Hera's hands is perpetual, quiet, and unyielding, less an emotion, more a mechanism of cosmic order. You stay beside Hera as night fully descends on Olympus, the marble halls now bathed in silver light, and the distant stars twinkling like silent witnesses to divine routines. The palace is quiet, almost meditative, but Hera's attention remains fully engaged. You begin to understand that her vigilance is not reactive, it is preemptive, strategic, and ceaseless. Jealousy here has evolved into a subtle architecture of control. The mainstream historical fact grounding this section is that Hera's mythic identity as protector of marriage and enforcer of order extends beyond mortal relationships. She is depicted as administering oversight to the entire divine system, ensuring that Zeus's impulsive desires do not completely destabilize Olympus. Her interventions are often indirect, manipulating circumstances, guiding perceptions, and orchestrating consequences without open confrontation. You watch her move along a balcony overlooking mortal cities below. Minor infractions are present everywhere. Husbands who linger too long on a flirtation, children who overstep boundaries, small rituals performed incorrectly. Hera does not act immediately. Instead, her influence is subtle, the adjustments invisible but inevitable. It is a quiet demonstration of power that transforms missteps into lessons that ripple through mortal and divine realms alike. A fringe tidbit emerges. Some myths suggest Hera could weigh mortal households spiritually, sensing imbalance and correcting it before it becomes destructive. Historians still argue whether this was intended literally or symbolically, yet you feel the logic. Hera's vigilance functions as a regulatory mechanism, ensuring the stability of social and divine systems. A soft joke drifts in. Zeus invents drama for fun. Hera audits the fine print afterward. You can almost hear the sigh of cosmic patience, the kind that only comes from centuries of watching chaos unfold and correcting it quietly. You notice her attention lingering on minor gods who might have overstepped invisible boundaries. Hera doesn't punish them immediately, but ensures that consequences are inevitable. Their next choices are subtly guided, perception adjusted, and the balance restored without spectacle. This is her method: indirect, patient, and meticulous. Historians still argue whether Hera's indirect enforcement mechanisms symbolize female authority in a patriarchal mythos, or simply reflect narrative strategies to maintain divine hierarchy. Observing her now, you realize it is both. She executes authority through subtlety, shaping outcomes across time and circumstance. A quirky detail surfaces. Some myths suggest Hera occasionally manifests small symbolic reminders of previous transgressions: a flicker of moonlight in a certain pattern, a peacock appearing unexpectedly, or a faint whisper in a dream, to encourage reflection and compliance. These interventions are invisible to most, yet profound in their cumulative effect. As night deepens, Hera returns to her central chamber. Zeus remains elsewhere, unconcerned. The structures she maintains, marriage, family, social norms, divine hierarchy, remain intact. Her jealousy is no longer mere emotion. It is a continuous, enduring force that sustains order across Olympus and the mortal world. You begin to understand that Hera's power is terrifyingly quiet, almost invisible, but eternal. It is patience, memory, and vigilance embodied, a constant that shapes reality without need for spectacle or confrontation. You walk with Hera as the night deepens further, the faint hum of Olympus carrying only minor sounds, the shuffle of nymphs, the distant laughter of lesser gods, and the whisper of wind against marble. In this quiet, you notice the full scope of her presence. Hera does not simply act. She observes, remembers, and adjusts. Jealousy, in her hands, has become a mechanism of cosmic governance, precise and perpetual. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this section is that Hera's mythology consistently portrays her as a goddess whose influence extends beyond emotional responses, shaping both mortal and divine systems. Her actions enforce legitimacy, protect institutions of marriage, and preserve social and cosmic hierarchies. Unlike Zeus, whose chaos is dramatic and visible, Hera's interventions are subtle, enduring, and often invisible to those she influences. You follow her gaze toward a mortal settlement below. Couples move through routines, vows, offerings, and domestic tasks, all seemingly ordinary. Yet her attention transforms these ordinary moments into a lattice of influence. Minor missteps, overlooked rituals, or hushed tensions ripple outward under her watch, corrected not with spectacle, but with quiet, systemic precision. A fringe tidbit drifts into your awareness. Some myths suggest Hera can perceive the long-term consequences of mortal and divine actions, anticipating conflicts and redirecting them before they escalate. Historians still argue whether these portrayals were symbolic or literal, yet standing beside her, you sense the effectiveness of this approach. Subtle corrections that ensure stability while leaving appearances unchanged. A soft joke surfaces. Zeus storms the heavens. Hera schedules the repairs. It is a wry observation of the ongoing balance she maintains, an eternal ledger of action and consequence. Her attention shifts to minor gods who might challenge her domain. You notice she does not confront them openly. Instead, she influences events so their behavior aligns with expectation. Jealousy becomes instruction, restraint becomes guidance, and patience becomes enforcement. The invisible architecture of consequence hums along like clockwork. Historians still debate whether Hera's role represents narrative misogyny, punishing the powerless, or a depiction of sophisticated management within a patriarchal mythos. Observing her now, you recognize that it is both. Mythologically, she demonstrates authority through indirect influence, reinforcing moral and social structures across time. A quirky detail emerges. Some traditions hold that Hera occasionally sends subtle signs to mortals, a peacock appearing near a crossroads, a small symbolic mishap, or a fleeting vision, to guide behavior without open intervention. These reminders reinforce her lessons, ensuring her influence endures without spectacle. As the night deepens toward its zenith, Hera returns to her throne. The systems she maintains, marital, social, divine, remain intact. Zeus's whims, mortal failings, and minor infractions all unfold within the invisible network she oversees. Her jealousy has become administration, vigilance, and eternal oversight. And you finally realize, Hera's power is not in thunder or fury, but in perpetual memory, patient correction, and unwavering attention. Olympus survives because she never forgets, never abandons her post, and ensures the system endures beyond mortal and divine caprice. You stay with Hera as the night reaches its deepest hour, when the stars are brightest and the world below seems hushed under a soft silver glow. Olympus feels suspended in time, a place where every shadow and echo carries the weight of past actions. You realize now that Hera's vigilance is both infinite and meticulous. Jealousy here is not sudden rage, but a constant calibration of order, a quiet enforcement of consequence that stretches across generations. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this final section is that Hera was revered as the protector of marriage and the enforcer of legitimacy. Her myths depict her as both feared and respected because she ensures that social and divine contracts are honored. While Zeus acts impulsively and visibly, Hera operates quietly, subtly correcting, guiding, and punishing where necessary. Her interventions are systemic, patient, and enduring. You observe her pacing through halls lined with offerings, statues, and inscriptions commemorating past punishments and rewards. Each artifact, each tribute serves as a marker of her authority and her unrelenting memory. Mortals and minor gods alike learn to respect her through these stories and symbols. Her presence alone teaches obedience and reinforces cosmic balance. A fringe tidbit drifts in. Some myths claim Hera could subtly influence the perception of time and events, allowing consequences to unfold at the right moment, long after a transgression has occurred. Historians still argue whether these accounts are meant to be taken literally or as symbolic devices to illustrate foresight and moral enforcement. You sense, however, that the narrative truth is clear. Her patience is as formidable as any divine weapon. A soft joke floats by. Zeus collects mistresses. Hera collects legacies. Her power, unlike his chaos, accumulates over centuries, silently shaping the cosmos without the need for spectacle. You notice her attention lingering on mortal marriages and divine interactions alike. She does not need to act overtly. The lessons she instills, through symbolic punishment, ritual observance, and subtle nudges, ensure that balance is maintained. Even the smallest infractions are corrected, often without anyone realizing why. The invisible hand of her jealousy guides both mortals and gods toward stability. Historians still argue whether Hera's actions were meant to illustrate divine moral order, patriarchal control, or narrative strategy. Observing her now, you recognize that it is all three simultaneously. She embodies vigilance, enforcement, and subtle pedagogy. Her jealousy is never fleeting. It is structural, enduring, and precise. A quirky detail emerges from lesser-known myths. Hera sometimes uses minor divine messengers, symbolic animals, or dreamlike visions to convey warnings, nudge behavior, or remind mortals of past mistakes. These interventions are discreet yet potent, ensuring that her influence persists across time and circumstance. As night stretches toward dawn, Hera settles back into her central chamber. Zeus is elsewhere, oblivious to the invisible scaffolding maintaining Olympus. Mortals below act within her unseen framework. Minor gods adjust their actions to her expectations. The systems she has nurtured, marital fidelity, divine hierarchy, and cosmic order, remain intact. Her jealousy has become enduring administration, patient correction, and eternal oversight. And standing there, beside her, you finally understand. Olympus survives not because of thunderbolts or power displays, but because someone never forgets, someone watches ceaselessly, and someone ensures that order endures across generations. Hera's jealousy is not just emotion, it is architecture, memory, and eternal vigilance. As dawn approaches and the first hints of sunlight shimmer across Olympus, you feel the soft, steady rhythm of the world returning to life. Hera's influence lingers everywhere, woven into rituals, stories, and the very fabric of divine and mortal existence. Her jealousy, patience, and meticulous oversight have guided countless actions, shaped destinies, and maintained balance without a single dramatic outburst. It is a quiet force, invisible yet undeniable, the kind of power that endures because it is patient and perpetual. You reflect on the lessons hidden within her myths, that vigilance can be gentle yet firm, that consequences can be subtle yet enduring, and that structures, whether cosmic, social, or personal, are preserved through consistency and attention rather than spectacle. Hera's world is one of precision, memory, and unyielding responsibility. Her jealousy is not about petty wrath. It is about maintaining order, teaching through consequence, and ensuring that chaos is contained before it spreads. As you drift through this realization, you notice the harmony in imperfection. Zeus acts impulsively, mortals falter, minor gods err, yet the cosmos flows because someone is always attentive. It is a reminder that oversight, patience, and care, qualities often overlooked, hold the most enduring power. Hera's world is one of endless cycles, eternal vigilance, and subtle influence, where every action resonates, every infraction is noted, and every lesson persists. Now, as you imagine the gentle hush of Olympus fading into morning, let your mind settle with the knowledge that even in chaos, there is structure. Even in jealousy, there is guidance. And even in eternity, there is quiet balance. Let your thoughts soften, your breath slow, and your mind drift, carried by the endless rhythm of the gods. Sweet dreams.